This is the true story of Jack the Ripper, the murderer who sent letters with organs of his victims to the police to laugh at them. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who lived in London in the time of 1888. The first victim of Jack was a woman named Mary Ann who appeared lifeless with 2 cuts on her neck. While the police investigated this case, another woman who was also a prostitute appeared in an alley with cuts identical to the ones Mary Ann had on her neck. After a couple of erroneous arrests by the police, 2 other women appeared lifeless with the same cut, except that the last one had been disemboweled. Due to the cuts, many forensic experts of the time deduced that the person responsible for the terrible acts had ample anatomical knowledge, given that his cuts were perfect, and this was confirmed with the last and most terrifying victim of Jack. His victim was Mary Jane Kelly, who was found lifeless in her room, totally unrecognizable. Jack's identity was never known until 2014, where from one of his victims' clothes, DNA traces were extracted, resulting in the identification of Aaron Comiskey, an immigrant who suffered from schizophrenia.
This was the most evil man in history. In the 1940s, Pine Hill, Tennessee, had an unsettling figure on its outskirts, Jeb Barrow, a wiry man who ran a butcher shop known for its strange, unique cuts. People from nearby towns traveled to buy his meat, even though his shop's walls were lined with hunting trophies and mounted knives that gave the place an eerie air. When people began disappearing, including a traveling salesman and a local hunter, rumors pointed toward Jeb. Witnesses had last seen several of the missing near Jeb's shop, and strange stains were often spotted behind his store. Sheriff Elmer Haskins started investigating, keeping a close eye on Jeb. One night, Elmer saw a faint glow from the shop's cellar and decided to enter the next day under the pretense of a friendly visit. While Jeb briefly left him alone, Sheriff Haskins sneaked into the cellar, finding hooks stained with blood and belongings like watches and wallets, items from the missing townsfolk. The sheriff confronted Jeb, who only grinned and muttered, "There's more where they came from." Jeb was swiftly arrested, and his chilling confession detailed each of his crimes. The townspeople, horrified, refused to discuss him as years passed, but locals say that on cold nights near the old lot, you can still hear the eerie clang of hooks, a chilling reminder of Pine Hill's butcher and the horrors he left behind.
This man was the most dangerous in the world. In 1963, in New York City, a man named Jerry Dunk ran a small hot dog stand on Main Street. But his hot dogs weren't just snacks. They were a sensation. People said they were the best they'd ever tasted. No one knew what made them so good. Jerry's secret recipe was a closely guarded mystery. Families lined up around his stand. Jerry always greeted them with a warm smile and a friendly attitude. He'd chat with the dads, talk about sports, or fishing. Many of the fathers said, "I'm just going back to Jerry's for another hot dog," and left with a smile. But they never came home. Police started an investigation. At first, Jerry was all smiles, playful, helpful, saying, "I'm just a guy with a grill." But as more men went missing, the police searched his house. What they found was horrifying. In Jerry's basement, hidden behind a locked steel door, there was a full-size basketball court. But that wasn't the scary part. At the other end of the room stood a massive industrial incinerator, its walls blackened with soot. Next to it, piles of men's clothing. When the police found him in his secret hideout, Jerry just smiled and said, "First rule of the game, you gotta win." When they asked where the missing men were, he pointed to the incinerator and whispered, "I'm the king of Dunk." Then he ran straight toward the flames, and now you can probably guess how he kept his hot dogs hot.
Why did evil people like this exist? In the 1920s, a man named Philip D. Cupp operated a thriving hot air balloon business in Miami, Florida. His flights gave customers stunning ocean views, making his company widely admired. But by 1925, disappearances in the area had surged by nearly 500%, leaving authorities baffled during their investigation. A fisherman reported seeing a man fall from a hot air balloon. By the time he reached the location, however, the man was gone, and the balloon was already drifting back to shore. When questioned, Philip insisted he hadn't flown any balloons that day and suggested it might have been another operator. However, it soon came to light that he was the sole hot air balloon business owner in the area. To dig deeper, the authorities sent an undercover officer named Joffrey on a solo flight with Philip. The ride began smoothly, but then Philip ominously remarked, "Whatever goes up must eventually come down." When Joffrey turned to confront him, Philip lunged, and a fierce struggle broke out. From the ground, onlookers could only watch as the balloon rocked violently before crashing into the water. Tragically, neither Philip nor Joffrey made it out alive. In the aftermath, it was uncovered that Philip had been behind over 400 disappearances in the Miami region. This man was the real-life Frankenstein. In May 1931, Dr. Charles Harris conducted secret experiments in Redwood Valley, a remote town in California. Known for his reclusive nature and intense research, Harris was obsessed with reviving lifeless animals. The townspeople, aware of his strange hobby, regarded him with a mix of fear and curiosity. Soon after, a farmer discovered his livestock had undergone bizarre changes. The authorities followed the odd trail and traced it back to Harris's secluded estate. The townsfolk called in Sheriff Thomas Lynch, a skilled lawman known for solving tough cases. A few days later, a young boy went missing. The community searched desperately but found no trace. Clues eventually led Sheriff Lynch back to Harris's property. One night he entered the estate and found a hidden underground laboratory. Inside, parts lay scattered amid strange humming machines. To his shock, the missing boy was there, connected to a device meant to revive him. Hearing faint cries for help, Lynch rushed to stop the machine. Suddenly, a loud crash came from a nearby door. It swung open, revealing a large, stitched figure moving toward him. Lynch disabled the machine, causing an explosion that engulfed the lab in flames. He and the boy barely escaped. Dr. Harris was never seen again.
This is the unsettling story behind Slender Man. In 1977, a man named Silvino Armstrong lived in Huntsville, Alabama. Silvino was well known in the town because of his remarkable height, nearly 10 feet tall. His unusual size made him a local sensation, admired by many. However, no one suspected the dark secrets he kept. In the summer of 1979, 4 young men mysteriously disappeared after camping in the woods. One of them managed to escape and informed the police. The survivor claimed a tall figure wearing a suit and a blank white mask had taken his friends. The authorities searched the forest but found no clues, dismissing the case as a bizarre panic. The townspeople, however, weren't convinced by this explanation. 10 years later, with 9 more young people gone, suspicion grew around Silvino. His presence often matched reports of the eerie figure seen before the disappearances. Silvino was eventually arrested, but due to insufficient proof, he was released. The case was quietly closed, never to be spoken of again. This eerie tale became the inspiration for the character we now know as Slender Man.
This man is the last survivor of the Russian sleep experiment, considered one of the darkest chapters in human history. In the 1940s, a group of scientists conducted a terrifying experiment on 5 prisoners during the war. The goal? To keep them awake using a strange gas they had developed. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. The gas didn't just keep them awake. Little by little, it made them lose their sanity. The prisoners were locked in an airtight room, monitored by cameras and microphones. What happened next will chill you to the bone. Some say the experiment was canceled. Others believe it was never officially recorded. On the 9th day, one of the men started screaming nonstop. He ran around the room for hours until his voice simply failed. He couldn't speak anymore. 2 others began ripping pages from books and covering the cameras, blocking all visibility. When the room became completely dark and silent, that's when the real terror began. The guards who entered afterward reported finding something inside that no longer looked human.
What this man did will make a grown man cry. During the 1930s in Orphan City, Tennessee, there was a man named Alfredo who owned a giant aquarium that was very successful. The main attraction of the aquarium was Al's giant albino shark named Bertram. After years of being open, everything was great until an employee went to the police, claiming that he witnessed Al throw a lifeless body into Bertram's tank one night. After further investigation, it was discovered that disappearances in the town had increased almost 500% since the aquarium had opened. The police would then set up surveillance on Al and watch what he was doing at night. After a few days, they witnessed him enter a random house with a suitcase and then an hour later walk out with it. But this time he was struggling with the weight of the suitcase. The police would then secretly follow him and would end up at the aquarium. Once Al entered inside, the police raided the aquarium, but when they attempted to arrest him, he resisted and they started to chase him on foot. He eventually ran up to the top of Bertram's tank, and when the police surrounded him, he jumped in and was quoted saying, "Protect me, my sweet Bertram." Al was never seen again, and what they found in the suitcase led investigators to connect him to over 400 disappearances over an 8-year span.
This was the most evil man that ever lived. In 1976, the quiet town of Blackmore, Virginia, became the center of a national mystery. A local hermit named Calculator was accused of causing the disappearances of over 40 people from nearby areas. Cal, known as the Raven King, was a reclusive man fascinated by ravens. He often walked the forest with his pet birds, which locals believed acted as his eyes and ears, spying on anyone near his hidden shack. In 1980, Cal was arrested and the disappearances stopped. He was sentenced to life in prison, but in 1995, guards discovered his cell was empty during a routine check. Inside, they found feathers and strange symbols. Soon after his escape, flocks of ravens were seen circling the town, and people began disappearing again. Blackmore went on lockdown, with residents locking their doors and staying inside after dark. As the number of ravens grew, so did the town's fear, believing Cal had returned to reclaim his domain. This was the most evil man ever. In the 1960s, there was a man named Phil E. Cheese, a well-known figure in Rhode Island, famous for his real estate advertisements plastered on billboards and TV screens. However, Phil carried a dark secret. He wasn't really a real estate agent at all. His career was merely a cover, a means to lure victims into his home. For years, he had operated under this guise without suspicion, until a newlywed couple, Mick and Crystal Beth, crossed his path. On October 18, 1966, Mick and Crystal scheduled a house visit with Phil. They were unaware of the dangerous situation they were walking into. As soon as they stepped inside, they both sensed something was wrong. The house was outdated and dirty, which turned them off, but they decided to stick it out just to be polite. As the showing came to an end, Phil mentioned, "There's one last thing I'd like to show y'all." He led them to the basement. Once they reached the bottom, he locked the door behind them. They heard his voice from above. "It's too bad I have to do this. I actually like you too." But just as Phil began descending the stairs, he misstepped. He fell all the way to the bottom, his body contorted like a pretzel. Seizing the opportunity, Mick and Crystal grabbed the key and escaped to get help from the police. When the authorities arrived, they were horrified by what they discovered in Phil's basement. Several officers were so disturbed they retired shortly afterward. As for Phil, he was rushed to the hospital.